So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this call today. This is an introduction to Business and Human Rights, Business and Human Rights 101 for our readers and viewers who maybe don't have such an in-depth knowledge of what the topic is about, to kind of set the stage for the rest of this month's content. So if we could go around and really quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Bronte Crichton-Shaw, and I'm a correspondent for Human Rights Pulse. Along with Ploy, we source content on the monthly themes, and the theme for April is going to be business/economics and human rights. So that's why I'm here today.
Hi everyone, I'm Ploy, and I'm also a correspondent, as Bronte's introduced me as. Yeah, not much to add there really.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana and I'm community manager at Human Rights Pulse, so I'm quite used by now to appear on screen. We created the Pulse community sessions, as some of our community members might know, where we do these IGTV lives and we discuss about topics that the community members want to bring in. And I have written articles about business and human rights, and I'm much interested into this topic, so this is why I'm here today, so we can have a meaningful discussion about it.
Hi, I'm Augustin. So I've been invited by Bronte to join this session because I'm writing my master thesis in business and human rights, and I'll be also doing an internship with a business and human rights organization. I'm really excited and looking forward.
Hi, I'm Tobe from South Africa, and I'm a contributing writer for Human Rights Pulse. I usually like to contribute articles on trafficking, and also I think that business does have a language and how it plays in terms of that topic.
Amazing. Great to meet all of you guys. And thank you so much for being here today. I thought I would start by asking what business and human rights means to you, and what kind of experiences you've had in the topic so far. So whoever wants to take the floor.
I'll start. I suppose. So for me, I'm a paralegal in sort of the commercial world. So for me, we're surrounded by all sorts of businesses, and just because that exists, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be adopting a rights-based approach. Whether that's employment law, and workers have rights, and we need to make sure we cater to that, or environmental law, businesses using lots of paper or lots of recycling, stuff like that. And as well, it's the rise in technology, how we have rights to data, and just because businesses are going all online, especially during lockdown, doesn't mean we shouldn't stop, pause and think, are we doing this the right way? Are people getting protected? And what more can we do to safeguard those rights?
That's super interesting, actually. Oh, if I can go on, because I think from my perspective, what was interesting is because I studied international law and human rights law, we always had a tendency, at least from my experience, to exclude businesses from the prism, because it has always kind of been perceived as the antagonist to the whole paradigm of human rights. And actually, that's kind of what got me interested into it, because we had a few business law courses and international commercial law courses. And from that point on, gradually, I started integrating business and human rights as a concept within my studies, and realized that actually it's one of the topics that maybe has the most potential in terms of development. And yeah. So what you said was actually interesting, because I feel like we come from very different perspectives, but they're kind of meeting in the middle ground.
Augustin, what you said is, oh no, sorry, I keep on speaking. No, I'll go last. No, I'll go last. Don't.
Okay, I was just going to say that I do agree with both ladies as well, because I think what interested me in business and human rights is that I took up an internship with a boutique law firm that deals with business and human rights. And I was working on the 7 pillars of the United Nations dealing with business and human rights. And it's just, it's quite interesting how it's the concept has been extending in Africa, because I'm in the African continent, but at the same time, not a lot of people are aware of those pillars that the United Nations has put in place. for business and human rights. So I think it's such an important topic because it has it intertwines with many of the social injustice issues that we're dealing with, as I've mentioned previously, like human trafficking, labor laws, etc.
I absolutely agree with everything that everyone has said, and especially Augustin, what you were saying about international law and human rights law, the paradigms that we are used to study those subjects as antagonistic to business law, as in, you know, business law goes against it. But as Ploy rightly was saying, why are we not implementing a rights-based approach to business? Because human rights operate in an economic world, in a real world where business is the day-to-day reality, the bread and butter of every transaction that we do. So I absolutely agree with the fact that the business and human rights law, or business and human rights in general, is a very is an area that has a lot of potential, is ripe with possibilities to research and to maybe implement a new paradigm. And again, as you, Tobe, were saying, the for example, I don't know what the 7 pillars of the UN are. I mean, I might have heard, or I might know them generally, but if you ask me now, what are those pillars? I actually do not know. So maybe you can tell us. But this is just to prove, I'm not gonna, I don't want to put you in a weird position. It was just to say that there is so much to learn and to know and to talk about, because there is so much potential in there. And this is why I started writing about it. This is why I have a strong interest in it. And I've noticed ultimately a judicial, like a shift in how judicial proceedings are being carried out. So I see more international cooperation in actually implementing a rights-based approach that is no longer concerned with pure private international law and business law that would infringe human rights protections. And this is a very welcome step. And we can discuss this further in this discussion, but yeah.
I think these are really, really good points from everyone. So I actually studied economics, and before I started at university, I was really much more of a social sciences or even humanities person. Economics was never something that really appealed to me. But once I took a couple of courses in it at university, I realized how much economics actually underpins every single other aspect of our society. I mean, if you look at history, so much of history is shaped by actually trade history. Really, like many of the main historical events were shaped by kind of profit-based forces, basically by market forces. And it's the same today. I mean, when we look at a number of key human rights issues, such as like forced labor or slavery, trafficking, so on and so on, they're underpinned by a profit motive and by the failure of society to adequately restrain that profit motive in the face of rights infringements of individuals. So that's what I find really interesting about the topic, is the way that it kind of intertwines with most other human rights issues on some level. Sorry, did anyone else have any thoughts? Maybe I just rambled on a little bit too long.
No, I personally do agree with you, and it's a pity that society doesn't realize how much these issues intertwine, because people have this misconception that if you deal with one issue, then all of a sudden the world will be at peace or whatever. But it takes time, and also it takes learning as well. And if we allow ourselves to learn, especially in the context of business and human rights, then we'll be able to kind of bridge and understand a gap of understanding to say that, okay, what are the steps that we need to take? And most obviously involving our governments and our basically people in these high positions, who are usually most of the time also engaged in business and human rights.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with what Tobe said, and also I think what you said, Ronte, is quite interesting actually, because there is definitely a dimension in trade and commercial matters that has been shaping policies as well throughout historical times. And I have a feeling that that's why human rights within businesses is quite a sensitive area, in the sense that it's hard to develop any binding mechanism, any hard law in that topic, because there's too many factors that kind of interplay. So that's why right now, I'd say that the overall legal norms and legal system that we have to tackle business and human rights is still kind of limited and is shifting constantly. because businesses both have an economic incidence, but also a political one and a social one. And all those dimensions intertwined do make it complicated as well to kind of progress in terms of human rights, because adopting a human rights-based approach really has to shift the perception of businesses on many different levels, and not only a structural one.
I think that something important in that respect is indeed the shift, a multi-layered shift that has to happen in the way businesses are perceived and in the way businesses themselves operate within their business models and their broader culture, so the culture of a business and the culture of a particular society. And I think that you are absolutely right, Augustin. There is the fact that hard law is so difficult to implement is a problem, because everything that we have out there are voluntary codes of this, voluntary code of that, soft law instruments, and so on. And they're up to the specific business or to the specific government to either promote or implement. But at the same time, I think that those very soft law instruments, or it doesn't have to be a soft law instrument, even just the shifting culture is the very basis, because the way society operates is based on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I think first and foremost, we need to shift the idea that big business is bad. I mean, it can be bad, as we have proof in many instances, but not necessarily. So we have to stop thinking in the dichotomy of big business bad against human rights. Big business can be very good and can be rights-based. And the way business operates and those very transactions and trade can be human rights compliant and have to be human rights compliant. But as I said, instead of saying have to be, is can be, because society is shifting in such a way where many things are not tolerated anymore, and we want to, and also resources are limited, are scarce, so we have to find a way in which to, of course, maximize profit, but at the same time not destroying our own people or committing these violations. And if you ask me, like, well, how do we do that? I think that the young generation is pivotal in this, as in we are really driving a massive cultural shift, like, say, even us discussing what we are discussing right here, right now. But then, of course, perhaps we lack economic power. So, but by talking about it, by propagating the discourse, and by bringing attention, say, maybe to the government or to the businesses themselves, surely businesses have to operate with clients. And if the clients are aware, and that is us, that is everyone, if the clients are aware and sensitized and pushing for change, the businesses will adapt in turn. And we might create a community where businesses are fair and human rights compliant. So yeah, that's my take on it.
And just to add on that.
Oh, sorry, no, you go ahead, Augustin.
No, I just wanted to quickly add upon that, because I think what you said is really interesting. And also, I was going to say not only clients, but the different actors as well that you have within the production chain, because I think that's also really important, especially in terms of regulation, is that not only big companies are held responsible and accountable, but also every single actor at different points of the production chain. And also that communities or people that are directly involved by business practices are brought into the equation and are heard in the decision-making process. And that's why there's also different aspects of tackling, I think, business and human rights that can be both from a more top-down approach, where there's legislative reform in a sense and adoption of new procedures within businesses, but also from more of a bottom-up approach, where it comes from the communities, the people that are directly involved in business practices, that can then themselves shift the procedures.
I definitely agree that we're seeing a positive cultural shift forwards. But then one thing that I was thinking is that it's kind of ironic, really, that it seems like overall the trajectory of business is moving in a progressive direction, as in that businesses are becoming more and more conscious of global supply chains and how they can be sustainable and how they can adopt a rights-based approach. At the same time, just recently, there has been this Amazon scandal. I haven't been following it particularly closely, but perhaps you guys have been in a bit more detail, but that basically Amazon has been horrifically abusing their workers and overworking them, and they have no breaks and they're underpaid, and then they are being pressured by the company to pretend that actually everything is fine, and being pressured to speak up publicly saying that Amazon is a great place to work for, and like it's really kind of like almost conspiratorial. And Amazon is such a recent company. I mean, it really came to prevalence only within the last few years, and then we can see like a classic example of lack of proper regulation, so that there's a huge power imbalance. And it does seem to me that that's a key issue. And when we're speaking about big business, it's like you said, Diana, big business does not have to be evil. It doesn't have to be the bad guy or the villain. But at the same time, when you're dealing with a context where one entity has almost unlimited power over individuals, and the individuals are like not unionized or not able to push back in any meaningful way against that entity, I think this is inevitably going to lead to human rights abuses, or at the very least to kind of an abuse of that power in some fashion.
I agree. I was even looking at a similar story as well. It took place in, I think, China, if I'm not mistaken. And this huge company, what they would do is that they would install suicide nets because their workers would off buildings, and because there are human rights abuses in that company. So that company decided to put in suicide nets. But I'm thinking to myself, but why though? Why the need to do such a thing if you're not going to be listening to your workers? Because that's ultimately what the issue is that workers don't feel as though they're being listened to, and they're in this factory and they are trapped and beaten and all these atrocities. But it's crazy to me, and it happens a lot here as well within the African continent. As I've said previously, that as much as Africa is being aware of business and human rights, it's a bit of a problem because you have bullies sitting in governments who don't want to implement these issues. And as much as human rights commissions would try to put something in place, but there are so many bullies in high official positions. And so you have criminality such as child labor taking place, where 5-year-olds are mining cobalt for our phones that we use and our laptops, but nothing is being done about it because people are also afraid.
And this brings us to the supply chain issue, right? That it's basically impossible to be an ethical consumer because you have no control over the many different stages where the products that you consume are being produced. And there's no comprehensive or meaningful way to actually be certain that everything you consume is free of human rights abuse. Most likely, all of the coffee that we drink and the chocolate that we eat and the phones that we use have all at some point resulted in some individual experiencing suffering.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that obviously, we're highlighting all the human rights implications and issues within the commercial or business sphere. I guess I just want to come from the other side and just say, actually, businesses are good. They're good for the economy. They create jobs, which, add value to people's lives and open us for more opportunities. So, yeah, like I said, it's not all doom and gloom. But obviously we need to shift the thinking into that they can continue together in tandem, hand in hand, and what other things can we implement to secure these rights and actually have the companies listen to for example, the employees and hearing them about what's going on and how we can both work together to move forward. But it's not all bad.
Ploy, do you think that you're seeing an increase of that at the commercial bar, as in companies or clients sort of being a bit more aware of their own complicity in human rights issues?
Well, I think in terms of employment law, there's quite a lot of safeguards in the UK. So because that's been put into legislation, companies have to take considerations to those issues. So I think, I guess in that answer, yes. But then as society moves forwards, other issues come up, for example, like environmental issues, and that's not really in law. I don't think, I might be wrong. But then it's up to sort of us or like normal people, public, to discuss the implications there are to people's rights so that we can continue to create more laws or whatever it is, or guidelines, so that businesses then have to think about it. So I think that's like a good process. Obviously, it's not a one size fits all, but in the UK at least, I think that seems to be working.
The legislation constantly needs to be updated, right, and maintained.
Yeah, and in a sense, I think that's also the hardest part, because there's one dimension of business and human rights is that it keeps evolving, because it really depends on like the contextual human rights issues that you're going to be having in a specific region, and then what methods, what mechanisms you have to tackle it. So that's also why I think it's a constantly moving area of human rights. But as Polly said, actually, that's true, because I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on UK law, but I think there's been quite a lot of new legislation regarding business conduct, and especially the Modern Slavery Act, I think, recently, or maybe not so recently, but I've definitely heard some changes are going on about that, which I think is also interesting, because it really reflects the importance to have strong national institutions that can provide for that support. Because in business and human rights, there's, in a sense, two dimensions to kind of like handle human rights abuses, and it's going to be either by preventing that they happen, so all the mechanisms that we talk about that can be installed within businesses, but also there needs to be forms of remedies, right? Like as Tobe was saying, if you have corruption of people in higher positions, then you need to find a way to have remedies and to have leverage mechanisms. And in that sense, for that, you do need to rely on strong institutions at the national level, or at least at the regional level. And that's why it's also important to have the ability to, within a certain national framework, have sufficiently powerful actors to really enable that legislative aspect.
Mm-hmm. And Augustin, so you're writing your thesis in this area, of course. What's the specific topic that you're doing? Maybe you could give us a little bit more detail in a certain area.
Not so advanced at the moment, so I could give you a brief overview of the idea of the thesis. But I'm basically I'm going to be writing on the business responsibility and influence businesses can have on labor rights and environmental protection. So I'm adding environmental dimension, which I think is also super interesting in the context of business and human rights. And yeah, basically I kind of want to tackle both the goods and bads. So as Ploy said, it's not all bad. Also, you have really big commercial organizations like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank that are really promoting the development of business and human rights norms, and they're inherently businesses in a sense. I mean, they're not businesses, but they're business unions. So it shows also really how businesses are important for the promotions of certain human rights standards and are kind of core to this promotion, because without businesses, I don't think they could be implemented properly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the idea would be to tackle this dimension of business and human rights.
And how about you, Tobe? I know that you did an internship in business and human rights. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that as well, and some of the issues that you covered.
Yes, I was doing an internship with Global Rights Compliance, which is a boutique law firm, and they literally specialize in business and human rights. And I was working closely with the managing partner, who was very great in mentoring me about these issues. And we were working on various documents talking about, human rights and what's happening within the global context. And what I found interesting was that I think with business and human rights, there's also legal problems as well. For example, the terminology exploitation is not really defined by international law. And so it leaves room for loopholes whereby a person can claim exploitation, but it's not really, it wouldn't be classified as exploitation, or someone would be going through exploitation in their workplace, but they don't have the legal authority to back that up. So there's a lot of loopholes in our legal system as well, which makes it hard to tackle business and human rights, especially for the victims.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is really, really interesting. So a bit of a lack of clarity around some of the terminology as well.
I just wanted to say something with regards to seeing businesses promoting human rights, and businesses actually, I think what you were saying, giving us the other part of the story. I think that, again, back to what I was also saying, there must be a shift in this greedy mentality, because businesses are obviously and undeniably drivers of innovation and change, and they can, because they have that economic power, they can help in the promotion of human rights. But what has to be done is indeed to leverage that economic imbalance in everyone's favor. So instead of having, say, for example, in labor law, you can have, or even just in institutions, you can have bullies, or you can have big corporations holding, like Amazon, holding all the power, and the economic power of the single employees reduced to annulled, as is annihilated. We must implement legislation, but also behavior, as in equalize that, because as I was saying before, the big business operates based on the client demand, and that, even though they have the economic power, they can be easily stripped of that if the whole of the client demand is then against them. So there is, I don't think that sometimes people realize the power that they have in their hands, because as soon as you detract that demand, then there is no more need for supply, and then the business would collapse pretty easily. So shifting that greed mentality of, oh, I hoard all the wealth, I hoard all the power, and I'm going to use that against my very own employees, as in we can create even more wealth if the protections are in place. But then, as you were pointing out, Tobeka, there are many loopholes in the legislation. So we can have employment law legislation, labor law standards, ILO conventions, and so on. But as long as you will have loopholes where, for example, the definition of exploitation is not clearly defined, or you don't really know, or even maybe it can be genuine, an employer might not know what their responsibilities are in facing their employees, then you will have litigation, and then you will have people exploiting that in turn. And I always wonder here, I'm getting a bit into the philosophical discourse, I really like to believe that a community where this economic leverage is possible, where everyone lives happily together and we use resources consciously, is possible. But I wonder whether, as soon as we give powers to either businesses or institutions, there will be an intrinsic tendency of using that against the people or for their own benefit. So this is an open question that I've got for everyone, and that I constantly think about myself. And I wonder whether ethical capitalism can be a thing, whether ethical consumerism can happen in 2021 or the 21st century.
That is a really, really great question. I just want to give out a quick warning that we have about 5 minutes left for the discussion, so hope everyone can fit in their answers in that time.
I think, well, I'm a bit of an optimist, so my answer is yeah, because yeah, we can do that. Let's do that. I guess what I've seen, I suppose, is for example, the environmental issue, you know, cutting back on plastics, or making sure products are ethical throughout the whole production supply chain. What I've seen is then that for example, like Etsy or stuff like that, lots of smaller businesses are coming, and that's the backbone of their brand, is incorporating all these social policies, or what the consumer wants. And then some big brands, I guess, like, I don't know which one it is right now, but have implemented, for example, you know, shampoo bars, which are no plastics involved and everything like that. So I think it's possible, but how quickly and how much on mass scale is debatable, because ultimately businesses want to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say like the point of contention is exactly what you said, Ploy, that eventually businesses do want to make money. And I mean, I do have hope as well. I would tend to be an optimist, hopefully. So I think, especially ethical consumerism, I think is definitely reachable, because as Diana said as well, it's a question of social transition. So that is definitely ongoing and can really make this shift happen. But eventually, businesses having as a main motivation making profit, I think will always be kind of have this push and pull between eventually having an ethical goal or having an economic one. But I think this can definitely reach a balance, right? Because eventually I think it's never about completely eradicating one or the other, because profit is necessary for everyone's livelihoods in the end. Like, we all need to eventually make money as well. We need to make money as individuals, regardless of businesses. So I think it's also mostly about maintaining that balance between the ethics that we want to apply to our societal norms and then the profit that is necessary for this society to function.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any thoughts to add? One thing that I was thinking is that it also very much depends on the cultural context. Like, for example, how Ploy mentioned that in the UK, there's very strong workers' rights already integrated into a legal framework. And so, and kind of inherently, corporations that are operating in a UK context are forced basically to take account of human rights in their business practices. And that also can kind of be seen through a historical lens in terms of, like, for example, I'm from New Zealand. It's obviously a colonial country, like it was a colonized country. And I think some of probably the worst human rights abuses that we have seen in New Zealand were kind of based in this colonial framework. It was based in, but it was still a business issue. Like, it was like companies wanting to make profit or individuals wanting to make profit, and imbalances that were resulting because of trade, but that were also like deeply rooted in an uneven or in a power imbalance that was inherent to the process of colonization. So I think that, like, it can be very, very context dependent and specific, the way that these business and human rights issues kind of develop, and the way that they are applied in each individual context.
I think that something that can play into this maintenance of balance can actually be international as well. So you might have, there was this case, a Zambian case involving Vedanta Resources Limited, which is a mining company, and you've got that was then not prosecuted in the English courts, but a court ruled that it could have been heard in the English court, and it then resulted in a settlement paid by the company to the victims. And you would imagine how many players here are at stake, because you've got the justice system in Zambia, the English courts, and then the businesses, and many cultures, many stakeholders, many victims, sadly. And what happened there is that by that judicial cooperation that I was mentioning earlier, and strong institutions, we managed to push the business to pay a settlement, as I said. And I think that is a nice illustration of how we can ultimately maintain that balance, not even nationally or focusing on one specific culture or one specific nation or one specific economic power, but by combining all of that together. And because, again, ultimately it is indeed this push and pull of, we've got economic power, we've got money, we need money to live, and how do we balance that? Maybe the answer is by having strong institutions in place. I'm sure you, Augustin, were mentioning that are capable of giving a nice remedy. So, for example, the nice remedy in that case was settlement. And it was a lot of money given to the victims. So maybe that's not the most just. I would have perhaps said prosecution maybe, but settlement is welcomed. So
guys, we're just about to run out of time, but I think that's a really nice concluding statement, actually, and kind of drawing it back to the whole purpose of having the international rules-based system, and the whole purpose of having an international legal system, right, is so that we can try to globalize these kind of issues and make a system where human rights is enforced everywhere equally. So if anyone else has like a final concluding comment, I think that's just about our time, but thank you guys so much for joining. And yeah, does anyone else have a final statement to add?
I just want to say that it's so important that we're having these discussions now, and it's really interesting to hear from the different perspectives of, where everyone is